About 10 months ago, I visited my best friend from college in his small hometown. Let's call him Chris for privacy. I wasn't used to such a quiet, isolated place, but we spent the first couple of days exploring the local spots, having a good time. On my last night, Chris brought up a place he'd been wanting to explore for a while, a collection of abandoned houses hidden deep in the woods, several miles outside of town. He'd never had anyone to go with before, but now he did. We used to do a lot of hiking and exploring back in college, so it sounded like the perfect last adventure before I headed home. About 30 minutes later, we were walking through the woods on a narrow trail, our headlamps bouncing with each step. The sun had just set, and as the trees cast long, dark shadows around us, I felt the strange isolation of this place creeping in. It was quiet, too quiet. Even Chris seemed a little tense, glancing back over his shoulder every so often. After about 20 minutes, the trail we were following disappeared, leaving us to navigate a barely there path that twisted deeper into the forest. Another hour passed, and finally we reached a small clearing where a single, weathered house loomed ahead. More houses emerged as we walked forward, 4 in total. They weren't as old as we'd expected, just weathered and damaged by time. Modern siding and faint traces of paint still clung to the walls, and a thin gravel road connected each house, as though this was supposed to be a small community that never came to be. Others had clearly found this place before us. Graffiti covered the sides of the buildings, and broken glass and litter dotted the ground. We moved cautiously toward the first house. I could feel a growing unease. It wasn't just the usual discomfort of an abandoned place, it was a sense that something wasn't right. Something was off, as if we weren't alone. As we approached the first house, a loud crack shattered the silence, echoing off the trees. Both of us jumped, our heads whipping toward the sound. The noise had come from farther down the gravel road, near the other houses, but when we strained our eyes, nothing moved. Chris looked at me, forcing a grin, but I could tell he was as rattled as I was. We shrugged it off and cautiously stepped inside the first house. The floor creaked under our weight, weeds and grass growing through cracks in the floorboards. There was nothing left inside, just empty rooms filled with shadows that seemed to reach for us as our headlamps swept across them. We moved up the stairs, which groaned loudly with every step. The upstairs was somehow even darker than downstairs. No windows let in any light. The silence up here felt suffocating, pressing in on us as we tiptoed down the narrow hall. 2 doors stood at the end, one leading to a small bedroom and the other closed. Chris looked at me, his expression questioning whether we should open it. I gave him a slight nod, and he reached for the handle. Just then, we heard footsteps coming up from downstairs. They were slow, methodical, almost as if someone was dragging their feet. We froze, holding our breath, waiting to hear what they would do. The footsteps stopped at the bottom of the staircase. Then, a rough, grating voice echoed up the stairs. Hello. The voice was strained, like the person was struggling to speak, each word sounding as though it grated through broken teeth. I know you're up there. I just want to talk. Neither of us moved. I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears, my entire body tense. The man spoke again, this time quieter, but we still didn't dare to answer. Several seconds passed, then minutes. No sound. We waited, listening for footsteps going back down the stairs, but there was only silence. Chris gave me a look, and we carefully tiptoed back to the staircase. He leaned over to check the entryway, and when he turned back to me, his face was pale. There's nobody there," he whispered. I edged closer, peering over his shoulder. He was right. There was no one in sight. We crept down the stairs, moving as quietly as possible, checking the doorway and then outside. A single line of footprints, clear and deep, marked the path through the grass coming toward the house, but there were none leading back. I could feel panic clawing at me, and I knew Chris felt the same. "We should go," he muttered, and I nodded. Just as we turned to leave, we heard something from upstairs, a soft creak, like someone was shifting their weight. We froze, barely daring to breathe, but curiosity got the better of us. Against all reason, we stepped back inside and looked up the staircase. The figure was there, a hunched, shadowy silhouette, standing at the top of the stairs, its head cocked to the side, as if it was listening to us. We couldn't see its face, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching, waiting. "Come back up," it said, its voice dry, brittle like autumn leaves, but with an edge of something unnatural. Chris grabbed my arm, and we bolted, sprinting out the door and back into the trees. We stumbled through the woods, branches scratching at our faces and snagging our clothes. The darkness pressed in from all sides, but the adrenaline carried us until we reached the main trail. When we finally stopped to catch our breath, I looked back, half expecting to see the figure standing at the edge of the woods, watching us. But the forest was empty, silent as ever. To this day, we have no idea who or what was in that house with us. Sometimes I can still hear that voice in my head, whispering, inviting me back. We didn't tell anyone about what happened, not even Chris's family. But every so often, Chris will bring it up, and the look in his eyes tells me he remembers that night as clearly as I do. If that figure had found us, we might not have made it out of those woods alive. I had been searching for a used flatbed trailer for my truck for weeks. I'd recently bought a rugged pickup and was eager to tackle a few DIY projects at home. So when I stumbled upon an ad on Craigslist that read, "Flatbed trailer for sale, great condition, low price," I felt a jolt of excitement. I quickly texted the seller, a man named Hank. Our exchange was brief but friendly enough. "Come by tomorrow. I'll be here all day. You can check it out in person," he replied, his tone clipped but not unkind. I was thrilled this could be the deal I had been waiting for. The next day, as the sun began to dip in the sky, I loaded my truck with a flashlight and a spare tire, better safe than sorry. Plugging the address into my GPS, I set off, anticipation buzzing in my chest. The drive took me through winding country roads that narrowed and twisted deeper into the forest. As I ventured further into the woods, the sunlight began to filter through the trees, casting long shadows that danced along the road. The air grew cooler, and I rolled down the windows, letting the crisp scent of pine fill my lungs. But soon, that initial thrill faded. The deeper I drove, the more I noticed the stillness around me. It felt unnatural, almost oppressive. The quiet was punctuated only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird. I began to feel uneasy. Was it just my imagination, or did the shadows seem to move? I shook off the thought and focused on reaching my destination. Finally, I arrived at the cabin. It looked weathered, with peeling paint and grime-coated windows. My heart sank as I pulled up. There was no trailer in sight. I stepped out of my truck, scanning the area for any sign of Hank or the promised flatbed. "Hank," I called, my voice echoing in the stillness. Nothing. No reply, only the wind whispering through the trees. That knot of discomfort tightened in my stomach. I pulled out my phone and checked my messages. Sure enough, there was a new text from Hank Backyard. "Check it out." A chill ran down my spine. The backyard. Why would I need to go there? With a reluctant sigh, I made my way around the side of the cabin. The gravel crunched under my boots, each step amplifying my growing unease. As I walked, I glanced back at the woods. The trees stood tall and menacing, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The stillness wrapped around me like a shroud, and I could hear my heart beat loud in my ears. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. When I reached the backyard, I was met with disappointment. No trailer, just an old shed that looked like it had seen better days. I approached, peering inside. The musty smell hit me like a wall, and I could see rusted tools hanging haphazardly on the walls. Suddenly, I heard a voice behind me. "You made it," Hank said, stepping into view. He looked as if he belonged to the very woods surrounding us, rough, wild, and unsettlingly intense. His smile was wide, but it didn't reach his eyes. Yeah, I was looking for the trailer," I said, forcing a smile back at him, but a wave of unease washed over me as I took in his demeanor. "It's in the back." "Come on, I'll show you," he replied, turning without waiting for my response. I hesitated, a million alarms going off in my head. Something about him felt off, but curiosity and the hope of finding the trailer pushed me to follow. We moved deeper into the woods, the path narrow and overgrown. The air felt thick, almost electric, as if the very trees were holding their breath. Then I heard heavy footsteps just beyond my line of sight, an unsettling rhythm that made my skin crawl. "Do you hear that?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Hear what Hank shot back, glancing over his shoulder. His expression had shifted, and the friendly facade replaced by something darker. I felt the need to retreat, but the forest closed in around me. "I think I should go," I said, my voice trembling slightly. Hank stepped closer, invading my personal space, his eyes narrowing. "You don't want to waste your time, do you?" he said, his tone dropping to a low growl. Panic surged through me. My instincts screamed at me to run. Just as I turned to leave, a loud snap echoed through the trees, followed by footsteps approaching from behind. I didn't look back, I bolted. I sprinted toward the cabin, the thicket tearing at my clothes. My heart raced as I heard Hank yell something, but I couldn't make it out. I burst through the clearing and finally reached my truck, the sight of it bringing a rush of relief mixed with terror. I fumbled with my keys, hands shaking, as I jumped inside and slammed the door shut. Glancing back, I saw Hank emerging from the woods, a wild look in his eyes. "You can't just leave," he shouted, but I didn't care. I turned the ignition, the engine roaring to life, and floored the gas pedal, gravel flying behind me as I sped away. The cabin and the ominous woods shrank into the distance, but my heart still raced with adrenaline. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something terrible. As I drove back onto the main road, the shadows of the trees faded in my rearview mirror, but the unease remained. What could have happened if I had ventured further into the woods? The thought nagged at me, heavy in my chest. I glanced around nervously, expecting to see Hank's figure chasing after me, but the road behind was empty. My thoughts spiraled as I drove, each passing mile a reminder of how quickly a simple deal could have turned into a nightmare. I realized that sometimes the most dangerous things are hidden in plain sight, disguised as opportunities that could lead to danger. What would you do if you found yourself trapped in a place you thought you knew, only to discover it was hiding dark secrets? It was a typical Friday evening when I decided to visit my grandmother's old house after years of absence. Nestled at the edge of a quiet town, the house had always been a comforting presence during my childhood, a place filled with warmth, laughter, and the unmistakable scent of her freshly baked cookies. However, over the years, the house fell into disrepair after my grandmother passed away. It had become a mere shell of its former self, an embodiment of nostalgia tinged with melancholy. I hadn't intended to stay long. I simply wanted to gather some memories and perhaps salvage a few of her belongings before the house was sold. As I parked my car and stepped out, the cool autumn breeze rustled the leaves, carrying a hint of decay and nostalgia. The sight of the house sent a wave of emotion crashing over me. The peeling paint and overgrown garden told stories of neglect and time's relentless march. As I approached the front door, the familiar creaking sound greeted me, echoing the countless times I had entered the house as a child. I paused for a moment, memories flooding back, playing hide and seek in the hallway, my grandmother's gentle voice calling me for dinner. Stepping inside, I was hit by a mix of familiarity and sorrow. Dust motes danced in the air, illuminated by the fading sunlight streaming through the grimy windows. I started my exploration in the living room, where the old tattered sofa still stood, a silent witness to years of family gatherings. The once vibrant wallpaper had faded, the colors washed out like old memories. I found my grandmother's knitting needles still sitting on the table, alongside half-finished projects. It was as if she had simply stepped out for a moment, leaving everything behind. Moving through the house, I felt a strange sensation creeping up my spine, a feeling that I wasn't alone. It was probably just my imagination, fueled by the eerie silence enveloping the space. I shook off the unease and headed towards the kitchen. I recalled the countless afternoons spent here, baking cookies and sharing stories. But as I opened the kitchen drawer, my heart sank. There, amidst the clutter, was a small, weathered box that I had never seen before. It was locked. My curiosity piqued, and despite knowing I shouldn't pry into my grandmother's belongings, I found myself shaking the box, trying to discern its contents. It rattled ominously, the sound sending a shiver down my spine. Suddenly, I heard a noise from upstairs, a soft thud, almost like footsteps. My heart raced. I hesitated, rationalizing that it could be the old house settling, yet I felt an overwhelming urge to investigate. As I climbed the creaky staircase, each step felt heavier, each creak echoing like a warning. The upstairs hallway was dark, the air thick with dust. I reached the first door on the left, the bedroom where my grandmother had spent her final days. Pushing the door open, I was hit by a wave of memories, but there was something off. The bed was unmade, as if someone had been there recently, the sheets rumpled and thrown aside. I stepped inside cautiously, the floorboards creaking under my weight. My eyes darted around the room, taking in the photographs on the walls, my grandmother in her younger years, smiling and vibrant. But something caught my eye, a faint scratching sound coming from the closet. My pulse quickened as I approached it, every instinct urging me to turn back. Yet I couldn't ignore it. I slowly opened the closet door, half expecting to find nothing but dust and old clothes. But as the door creaked open, a dark shape loomed inside, barely visible in the shadows. I stumbled back, my heart racing. It was just an old coat, hanging lifelessly, but the sight sent my mind spiraling. What was happening to me? Feeling foolish, I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. I closed the closet door and turned to leave the room, but a flash of movement in the corner of my eye stopped me. I spun around, but there was nothing there. I shook my head, berating myself for letting my imagination run wild. I left the bedroom, trying to dismiss the strange occurrences as remnants of my anxiety. I continued my exploration of the house, hoping to find more familiar treasures among the remnants of my childhood. As I wandered into the bathroom, a feeling of dread began to settle in the pit of my stomach. The room felt off, too quiet, too still. I turned on the tap to wash my hands, and as the water flowed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. I turned to look at the mirror, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a shadow move behind me. I whipped around, heart pounding, but the room was empty. Just me and the reflection staring back at me, wide-eyed and frantic. I splashed water on my face, trying to dispel the growing anxiety. After all, this was just my grandmother's house, a place filled with memories. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the rooms. I decided it was time to head back downstairs. As I descended, I noticed the front door was slightly ajar. I was certain I had closed it earlier. "Hello?" I called out, half hoping it was just the wind, but my voice echoed back in silence. I pushed the door shut and locked it, but the sense of unease lingered like a specter, haunting me. I decided to sit in the living room, hoping to find solace in the familiar surroundings. I settled onto the sofa, the fabric still warm but comforting. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through old photos of happier times spent here. Yet, as I swiped through the images, a strange sense of foreboding gripped me. Just then I heard it again, a soft thud from upstairs. This time it was louder, more distinct. My heart raced as I fought the urge to flee. What could it be? I was alone in the house, or at least I thought I was. I grabbed a nearby flashlight, the beam cutting through the dimness. With trepidation, I climbed the stairs once more. The thudding continued, rhythmic and unsettling. I approached the door to the bedroom again, hesitating before I turned the knob. As I opened it, the room appeared empty. But as I scanned the space, I noticed something on the floor. A small note, hastily scribbled, lay near the bed. I picked it up, my hands trembling as I read the words scrawled in a frantic hand. "Don't trust the shadows. They know your secrets." A chill raced down my spine. Was this a prank? A joke left by someone else? Or something more sinister? My mind raced as I looked around the room, the air feeling heavy with unspoken secrets. Suddenly, I heard a loud bang from the attic above me. It was an explosion of sound, like something had fallen. I felt my breath hitch, and without thinking, I bolted down the stairs, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I grabbed my bag, ready to leave this place behind. But as I reached for the front door, it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as I twisted the knob frantically. It was stuck. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned back to the house, searching for another way out. I dashed to the kitchen, praying the back door would be open. I yanked it, but it wouldn't budge either. I was trapped. It felt like the house itself was closing in on me, the walls closing in, suffocating. Just then, a voice echoed from upstairs, faint but unmistakable. "Help me." My blood ran cold. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. I stood frozen for a moment, grappling with the choice before me. Should I investigate the voice, or should I escape while I still could? As the voice called again, I felt an inexplicable pull towards it. I gripped the flashlight tightly and headed back upstairs, each step filled with trepidation. I reached the top of the stairs, my heart racing. The voice grew louder, more insistent, leading me towards the attic door. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning me closer. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears as I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking ominously. Inside, the attic was filled with dust and cobwebs. Dim light filtered through a small window, casting eerie shadows on the walls. In the corner, I saw a figure crouched low, shrouded in darkness. "Please help me," the voice pleaded again, and I stepped closer, squinting to see. But as I drew nearer, my heart sank. The figure wasn't what I expected. It was a mannequin, dressed in my grandmother's old clothes, its eyes hollow and lifeless. I stumbled back, horror coursing through me. Suddenly, the attic door slammed shut behind me, plunging me into darkness. I pounded on the door, shouting for help, panic consuming me. The air grew thick and suffocating, the shadows stretching towards me, whispering secrets I couldn't comprehend. I turned back towards the mannequin as I caught my breath, confusion spiraling in my mind. It was just a mannequin, yet it felt as if it was mocking me. My instincts screamed to run, to escape this house that had suddenly transformed into a labyrinth of fear. I turned back to the door, still pounding on it, desperation rising within me. "Let me out. Please," I shouted, my voice echoing in the confined space. The darkness seemed to press in around me, amplifying my fear. I could feel the cold sweat on my forehead, my heart racing as I grappled with the reality of my situation. Then, I heard it again, that same faint scratching sound I'd noticed earlier. It was coming from the other side of the attic, and my curiosity mingled with dread. Was there someone else up here? Or was it merely my imagination playing tricks on me? With my flashlight flickering, I took a cautious step toward the sound. The beam illuminated dust-covered boxes and forgotten relics of my childhood. As I approached, the scratching grew louder, more insistent, almost as if something was trying to break free. I reached the far wall, where an old trunk sat, its lock rusted and barely holding it together. I knelt beside it, my pulse pounding in my ears. I grabbed the lid, and with a grunt, I pried it open. Inside, I found a collection of old photographs, letters, and faded memories. But beneath them, my stomach dropped. There, tucked away in the corner, was something darker, a stack of old, yellowed newspaper clippings. I pulled them out, my hands trembling as I scanned the headlines. They told a chilling story of a series of disappearances in the area over the last few decades. Young women had gone missing, their cases growing colder with each passing year. My throat tightened as I read one article after another, detailing how the community had been rocked by fear, how the police had been unable to find any leads. "Don't trust the shadows. They know your secrets," the note from the bedroom flashed in my mind. Was my grandmother involved in something sinister? My thoughts raced as I struggled to make sense of it all. I was so caught up in the whirlwind of emotions that I hardly noticed the sound had stopped. Then, I heard footsteps echoing from below. My heart sank. Someone was in the house. I ducked behind the trunk, my breath shallow and quiet. The footsteps were heavy, deliberate, moving closer to the attic stairs. Fear coursed through me. Peeking through a crack in the trunk, I strained to see as the attic door swung open, revealing a shadowy figure framed in the light. It was a man, tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to search the room. He stepped inside, glancing around with a predatory gaze, as if he could sense my presence. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't find me. He approached the mannequin, tilting his head as if considering it. "You're still here, aren't you?" he murmured, a chilling smile creeping across his face. My stomach churned. This was no ordinary intruder. He felt menacing, almost as if he belonged in this twisted narrative. "Where are you?" he called out, his voice low and gravelly. "I know you're here." I pressed myself deeper behind the trunk, every instinct screaming at me to remain silent. What did he want? Had he been watching me all along? I could feel my heart racing, each beat echoing in my ears, drowning out his voice. "I can help you," he said suddenly, almost cheerfully. "If you come out, I promise it won't hurt." The tone of his voice sent a fresh wave of terror through me. I didn't believe him. In that moment, I remembered the box I had found in the kitchen. The locked box, the key. If I could find a way to distract him, I could make it back downstairs and escape, but I had to be quick. As he turned away, examining the attic, I seized the moment and bolted from behind the trunk, darting toward the door. But just as I reached for the knob, he turned back, his eyes locking onto me. "Going somewhere," he sneered, stepping forward. I felt the chill of panic freeze me in place. "Stay away from me," I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. He laughed, a low, unsettling sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm not going to hurt you." "Not yet." Anyway, he stepped closer, and I could see the glint of something metallic in his hand, a knife. My instincts kicked in, and I turned, racing towards the window. It was small, but desperation fueled my strength. I shoved it open and climbed onto the ledge, the cool air hitting my face like a slap. I could hear him shouting behind me, but I didn't look back. I had to get out. I scrambled out onto the roof, my heart pounding in my chest. The ground was a long way down, and the thought of jumping sent a jolt of fear through me. But I couldn't stay up there, not with him so close. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and leaped. I landed hard, rolling to absorb the impact. Pain shot through my ankle, but I forced myself to get up, limping toward the trees at the edge of the property. I could hear him yelling behind me, the sound echoing through the night. "Get back here," he shouted, but I didn't stop. I plunged into the darkness of the woods, branches scratching at my skin as I pushed through the underbrush. I needed to find a way to escape, to get help. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, drowning out the pain in my ankle. I could hear the crunch of leaves behind me, the sound of him pursuing me. I zigzagged through the trees, desperate to lose him. As I ran, the fear transformed into a primal urge to survive. I recalled the newspaper articles, the missing women, and the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This was no random intruder. He was part of something far more sinister, and I had stumbled into a nightmare. I stumbled and fell, pain shooting through my ankle as I landed hard on the ground. I gasped for breath, trying to steady myself. The darkness enveloped me, and I pressed my back against the trunk of a tree, hoping the shadows would hide me. I held my breath, straining to hear him. The world felt surreal. Each sound magnified my heartbeat. The rustle of leaves, the distant sound of his footsteps drawing closer. Then, the footsteps stopped. I waited, panic tightening my chest. Had he lost me? Or was he waiting, lurking in the shadows, ready to pounce? Minutes felt like hours as I remained still, heart pounding, every nerve on high alert. Finally, I dared to peek out from behind the tree. The path was empty, the moonlight casting an eerie glow on the forest floor. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I needed to get back to my car, to get out of this nightmare. I limped away from the tree, moving cautiously through the underbrush. I had only taken a few steps when I heard a low laugh, sending a chill down my spine. "I thought you were clever," the man's voice taunted from the shadows. Panic surged within me, and I sprinted in the opposite direction, pushing myself harder, every instinct urging me to escape. I couldn't think about anything but survival. I broke through the tree line and spotted my car in the distance. I could see the headlights shining faintly. Relief flooded through me, but I knew I couldn't let my guard down. He could be right behind me. I sprinted toward the car, fumbling for my keys in my pocket. I reached it, my hands shaking as I struggled to unlock the door. Just as I finally got it open, I heard footsteps behind me, heavy and deliberate. "Don't run away from me," he shouted, his voice echoing through the night. I jumped inside, slamming the door shut and locking it. I quickly started the engine, my heart racing as I threw the car into reverse. But before I could pull away, I caught sight of him approaching, his figure illuminated by the headlights. He was closer than I thought, a twisted grin on his face as he raised the knife, his intent clear. I hit the gas, my car lurching backward, narrowly missing him as I sped away. I didn't look back, I just drove, my heart pounding, adrenaline coursing through me. The road blurred past me, and I felt a mix of terror and relief wash over me. I had escaped, but the memory of that night would haunt me forever. I knew I had to tell someone to make sure he was caught. The darkness of the woods loomed behind me, hiding the secrets that could have swallowed me whole. As I drove towards the nearest town, my mind raced with thoughts of the man, the mannequin, and the stories buried within those walls. My grandmother's house had held more than just memories, it had held danger. And I was determined to uncover the truth, to ensure no one else fell victim to the shadows that lingered in that old house.